There is an expectation, historicus perfectus, that a massacre leaves behind an echo.
Right, an acoustic signature of human suffering.
Exactly. When the artillery finally ceases its bombardment, you anticipate the residual chaos, the thick choking scent of burning Promethean, the frantic screams of the wounded.
The sheer auditory violence of survival reverberating against shattered stone.
Yeah. You expect the auditory landscape to mirror the visual slaughter. It is horrific, yes, but it is deeply recognizably organic. But what do you do when the murder of 10,000 innocent people is followed by absolute flawless silence?
You recognize that you are no longer observing a conventional battlefield. You are observing, a fundamental shift in the rules of reality. The absence of that post-carnage echo is not merely anomalous, it is a predatory vacuum.
Historiators of the Logos Historica Verita, Department of Historical Recovery. The man is Reston Cetus, and the woman is Ophelia Prexane.
A presentation on information extracted from the manuscripts of the Separata sector. Report 1.1.6 section Planet Baldar, accessible only to the Historicus Perfectus.
We are bringing this specific data extraction directly to you, Historicus Perfectus. Because if your strategic analysts assume standard imperial attrition rates when reviewing the Separata sector files, their projections will be fatally flawed. You must understand the sheer mathematical terror of what occurred here.
To comprehend that terror, we must first ground you in the immediate, blood-soaked aftermath of an unthinkable atrocity. The data from the primary combat manuscript places us within the mining city of Picars, on the industrial world of Baldar.
The 34th Regiment of the Astra Militarum, right?
Yes, the heavy shock troops known as the Red Ambles. They have just endured a meat grinder engagement against Renegade Space Marines. They are a shattered force.
I mean, their flak armor is cracked, their power cells are nearly depleted, and their physical endurance is entirely spent.
Completely spent. And it is at this exact moment of maximum vulnerability that they are forced into an agonizing, deeply psychologically traumatic scenario.
The primary combat data outlines that the entire surviving civilian population of Picars, which is, what, nearly 10,000 innocents?
Nearly 10,000, yes. The very people the regiment was deployed to protect.
Right, they suddenly swarm the Imperial positions. And they are not rioting. They are being puppeteered by mechanical parasites physically fused to their brainstems.
It's grotesque. When the guardsmen attempt to humanely subdue them, the manuscript notes that these parasites violently detonate in bursts of emerald energy, instantly killing the host and any nearby soldiers.
Which forces the hand of the commanding officer, Colonel Commissar Valentin Mansteinius. Confronted with a weaponized, infected populace that threatens to overrun his exhausted regiment, he executes the only viable tactical option remaining.
He orders the wholesale, systematic execution of the very civilians his regiment bled to defend.
The psychological toll of this action is the crucial baseline for our analysis today. I mean, the smoke hangs heavy. The blood of 10,000 civilians is fresh on the boots of the 34th Regiment.
The Imperial forces are morally hollowed out. They are just staring out at a carpet of murdered innocents.
And this brings us to the core mission of our deep dive. We are not here to dissect the tragedy of the civilians. We are drawing entirely from the primary Baldar combat data to analyze what emerged from the ashes of Picars immediately afterward.
We are tracking the transition from a traumatic human tragedy to an encounter with absolute cosmic horror.
Let's begin with the silence. The manuscript explicitly notes that the first indication of the impending threat was not visual.
Nor was it tracked on standard auger arrays.
No, it was a chilling, instantaneous shift in the atmospheric acoustics. We can examine the physics of that silence. A battlefield is a cacophony of overlapping frequencies, idling engines, groaning armor plates, the hyperventilation of panicked soldiers.
To nullify that entirely suggests an active, localized suppression of sound, or an enemy so utterly devoid of biological process that they generate zero ambient noise.
The data describes an absolute absence of traditional war sounds, no war cries, no track squeals from approaching armor.
Just a rhythmic, synchronized, terrifyingly perfect metallic thudding that begins to echo through the barren rock.
Thud, thud.
Exactly. The psychological degradation caused by that metronomic pacing cannot be overstated, historicus perfectus. The human mind in a high-stress combat zone subconsciously relies on auditory variables to map threats.
Like the roar of a combustion engine provides data on mass and velocity.
Right, and the scream of an advancing enemy reveals their emotional volatility and physical exertion. When you replace those organic variables with a sterile, perfectly uniform thud, you strip the guardsmen of their situational awareness.
It is no longer an assault, it is the ticking of a colossal, merciless clock ticking down to their eradication.
And as that ticking amplifies, the manuscript details a sickly, luminescent emerald fog rolling over the corpses of the executed citizens.
When the fog finally parts, what emerges is described as sheer, unfiltered nightmare. The vanguard steps into view. 30 stained metal skeletons.
20 are slender, mimicking the exact macabre proportions of a human skeleton stripped of flesh, while 10 are broad-shouldered, heavily armored variants.
And they possess no ocular sensors that the humans can identify. Only glowing slits radiating a cold mechanical luminescence, carrying rifle-like implements that bleed unholy green light.
We must contextualize the profound ignorance of the 34th Regiment in this moment. The supplementary data confirms that following the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Separata sector was utterly isolated from the wider Imperium for 3 centuries.
300 years of martial rule by local forces.
Yes. These men have fought human insurrectionists, they have fought the biological horrors of the warp, but they have never encountered the Necrons.
They have absolutely no conceptual framework for an ancient, immortal alien empire. To the Red Ambles, this is not a classified Xenos threat. It is an incomprehensible, supernatural manifestation of death itself walking out of the fog.
It is, but you have to look closer at the formation.
Well, yeah, I need to challenge a point here. The manuscript describes this formation of infantry, but it heavily details the figures leading the phalanx. In the center is an imposing regal entity draped in a mantle of metallic scales, wielding a crescent moon-bladed staff, pulsing with energy. An overlord.
Beside it is a heavily adorned lieutenant, a royal warden.
Right. If these are, as standard imperial dogma would suggest, mere soulless automata, how can they possess the tactical nuance to mock human nobility? I mean, why the scales? Why the regal posture?
Because this is an engrammatic preservation of supreme arrogance. You are correct to challenge the assumption of mindless machinery. They are not mindless. They are frozen in a state of terminal superiority.
Terminal superiority.
Yes. The Overlord is described as walking with the unhurried, contemptuous posture of a king surveying a lesser domain. This is not merely an aesthetic choice. It is a deliberate, highly effective psychological weapon.
By presenting themselves as regal corpse kings, they are visibly mocking the very concept of human hierarchy, biology, and life itself.
They demonstrate to the Imperial Guard that even in death, there is a terrible eternal order that fundamentally subdues the flesh.
It redefines the nature of fear on the battlefield. Think about the acoustic reality we discussed earlier. If you are an Imperial Guardsman, your entire survival mechanism is calibrated to the deafening, chaotic roar of artillery and the screaming of heretics.
Because noise equals life, even hostile life.
Exactly. A demon of the warp screams because it hates you. A rebel soldier screams out of fury or fear. But this sheer, indifferent silence, it is infinitely more sanity-breaking.
These machines are silent because, to their calculating minds, you are already dead.
You do not warrant the biological expenditure of breath. You are merely debris waiting to be swept away.
That indifferent silence is merely the preamble to the sheer mechanical scale of the annihilation they bring. The manuscript elaborates extensively on the heavy and specialized units flanking this skeletal infantry. This is not a mere patrol. It is a meticulously engineered vanguard designed for total extermination.
We need to analyze the physical mechanics of these specialized units, because this is where human logic begins to fray. The data notes 5 mechanical centaurs gliding above the rocky terrain on anti-gravitic platforms, Locust destroyers.
The physical description is deeply unsettling. Their skeletal torsos are entirely fused, structurally and permanently, to these hovering killing machines.
2 of them, the heavy destroyers, carry cannons of such obscene dimensions that the veteran guardsmen instinctively recognize a single discharge could bisect a Lehman Russ battle tank.
And leading that spearhead is a manifestation of pure, optimized butchery. The vanguard includes 3 triked abominations, Scorpec destroyers.
Moving with a terrifying, unnatural fluidity. Their limbs terminate in massive, crackling energy blades.
Yes, and they are commanded by a Scorpec Lord, a cyborg colossus composed of shifting armor plating and sides. I use the term cyborg carefully here. It is not a biological entity augmented by machinery, but a machine consciousness that has physically augmented itself to achieve the ultimate singular purpose of harvesting organic matter.
And the threat is not confined to the visible horizon. The ground itself is weaponized. The manuscript details dense swarms of silver scarabs, Kenumtech scarabs, literally devouring the bedrock as they ripple forward.
It's an overwhelming visual assault.
But what defies human comprehension are the entities hovering above them. Kenumtech wraiths. Serpentine metal specters that the data describes as phasing in and out of reality. I mean, I need you to explain the mechanics of that because it violates every fundamental law of physics the Astra Militarum operates under.
It is a process of dimensional phase shifting.
Dimensional phase shifting.
Yes. Think about it. The Imperial Guard constructs defenses based on the assumption of solid matter. Glass steel barricades, rockcrete bunkers, sandbags. The Wraiths utilize dimensional destabilization matrices that allow them to temporarily exist outside the standard material plane.
So they don't breach a bunker wall.
No, they simply glide through the atomic structure of the rockcrete as if it were air before solidifying their talons inside the chests of the men hiding behind it. It renders the very concept of physical fortification completely obsolete.
Which brings us to perhaps the most terrifying tactical maneuver in the entire report. It isn't a charge. It isn't a barrage. The entire metallic army comes to an absolute uniform halt, an unnatural, synchronized pause across the entire vanguard.
And then a piercing, highly concentrated emerald light bathes the entire Imperial defensive line. It sweeps over the hardened tanks, the trembling infantry, the artillery emplacements. It is a comprehensive, deep penetrating scan.
Stop. I have to push back on this because standard Imperial dogma dictates that machines without a biological pilot, without a human soul or organic processor, are strictly incapable of dynamic tactical adaptation. They're supposed to follow pre-programmed battle subroutines.
That is the assumption, yes.
But the manuscript explicitly states that immediately following this scan, the alien force flawlessly reorganizes. Without a single vocal command, without a localized Vox transmission that the human augurs can intercept, the units shift.
The heavy cannons align with the Imperial armor. The rapid-fire infantry aligns with the human shock troops.
Exactly. Are you suggesting this entity possesses sentience?
I am suggesting something far more dangerous than human sentience. I am suggesting pure, unclouded algorithmic computation. They are not merely reacting, they are solving.
Solving the battlefield.
Precisely. The Astra Militarum relies on human intuition, the shifting tides of morale, the sudden, desperate stroke of genius from a cornered commander. The Necrons, in this singular moment, demonstrate that they do not fight wars as we understand them, they compute them.
They scanned the Imperial line, calculated the exact armor thickness of the Leman Russ, measured the precise blast radius of the Basilisk's artillery, and instantly rearranged their assets to achieve a 100% mortality rate with maximum efficiency.
It is the difference between humans playing a game of regicide by candlelight, guessing at their opponent's strategy, and the Necrons executing a solved mathematical simulation where they have already computed every possible move until the end of time.
They have mathematically calculated the exact trajectory of your death before firing a single shot.
And the manuscript makes it excruciatingly clear that the human soldiers intuitively grasp this. The morale of the 34th Regiment begins to shatter in real time.
The air smells of ozone and blind panic. Men who an hour ago were trading blows with traitor Space Marines are now physically stepping backward, murmuring desperate prayers. They are paralyzed.
Which is the exact catalyst for the intervention of the command structure. The silence of the alien advance is suddenly and violently broken by the deafening roar of an adamantine chainsword revving to its maximum threshold.
Colonel Commissar Valentin Mansteinius forcefully inserts himself into the psychological vacuum.
Let us examine Mansteinius' actions deeply because it represents a fascinating philosophical countermeasure. He does not cower.
No, he steps directly onto the exposed parapet, his long coat snapping in the toxic wind, making himself a prime target. He utilizes his helmet's external augmenters to thunder over the metallic marching, publicly branding the approaching horde as abominations and soulless heretical machines that exist only to challenge humanity's divine mandate.
It is a brilliant, desperate masterclass in psychological recalibration. Mansteinius understands that his men are breaking under the weight of cosmic insignificance, so he aggressively reframes the narrative.
He does not attempt to explain the impossible physics of the enemy.
He degrades them. By labeling them defective machinery, he strips away the supernatural dread. He is forcing a localized reality on his troops. This is not a battle against immortal gods. This is a routine, holy purge of malfunctioning, heretical hardware.
And he backs up the rhetoric with immediate, highly specific tactical commands. He acts as a violent anchor for their scattered minds. He levels his bolt pistol directly at the green tide and explicitly orders the heavy weapon squads to focus entirely on the anti-grav locus platforms, while commanding the standard lasgun formations to concentrate their volley fire on the skeletal warriors.
This is where we must cross-reference the contextual data regarding the 34th Regiment's pedigree. The Red Ambles are heavy firepower specialists, veterans of breaking entrenched sieges. Mansteinius is deliberately leveraging that exact muscle memory.
His tactical assignments here are not random.
Not at all. They are the flawless execution of textbook Astra Militarum combined arms doctrine. He is forcing his men to retreat into their training, demanding they focus purely on the mechanical operation of their weapons rather than the existential horror of their targets.
But I must point out the massive, brutal caveat to this rallying cry. He is issuing these textbook orders while literally holding his own men at gunpoint. The manuscript explicitly notes the clicks of the Commissar's bolt pistol being leveled at any guardsman who hesitates.
It's the ultimate enforcement tool.
I have to question the underlying philosophy of the Imperial Guard here. Is this highly decorated veteran regiment holding the line out of genuine righteous faith in the God Emperor, or is it simply a dark calculus? Does the immediate, highly predictable terror of the Commissar's summary execution simply outweigh the creeping abstract dread of the silver skeletons?
That is the ultimate necessary paradox of the Commissariat Historicus Perfectus. The entire institution operates on the foundational principle that the soldier's fear of the officer must universally exceed their fear of the enemy.
So it's a calculated terror.
Mansteinius is relying on the familiarity of his own brutality. His men intimately understand the physics of a mass reactive bolt round shattering their skull. They do not understand the emerald physics of Gauss fire. He uses a known human terror to mathematically block the unknown alien terror. And for a fleeting, violent moment, the equation balances, the line holds.
And then the true inferno begins. The opening volleys are exchanged, and this is where the physical laws of the engagement completely betray the human defenders. Let's dissect the first few seconds of this combat, because it is a cascade of impossible failures.
The 34th Regiment responds with the full, devastating weight of their arsenal. On the left flank, a heavily armored Chimera transport roars forward, unleashing a sustained barrage from its multi-lasers, targeting the hovering carapaces of the heavy Locust destroyers.
Now, a multi-laser fires concentrated beams of thermal energy capable of melting plasteel and vaporizing organic matter. But the manuscript notes that these beams strike the metallic carapaces and simply dissipate.
Just wash over them.
They scatter harmlessly into the fog, leaving absolutely no scorch marks, no thermal blooming, no structural degradation whatsoever. How is that physically possible?
Because the necrodermis, the living metal composing the alien forms, does not adhere to human thermodynamic principles. It is designed to instantaneously disperse and absorb localized thermal and kinetic energy across its entire molecular lattice.
It just drinks the heat.
The heat is effectively consumed before it can compromise the structural integrity of the armor.
And the horror ripples down the line. In the center, the specialized infantry engages. Rattling snipers, renowned for their ability to thread a needle at extreme ranges, alongside heavy weapon squads wielding las cannons.
Weapons strictly designed to punch clean through heavy battle tanks.
Exactly. And they concentrate their fire on the standard, unshielded Necron warriors.
And the primary combat data confirms they fail to drop a single skeletal soldier. The kinetic impacts and localized energy spikes simply fail to register as lethal damage.
And from the rear lines, the massive basilisk artillery emplacement lobs earth-shattering high-explosive ordnance directly at the advancing Canoptech wraiths.
The explosive yield is tremendous, throwing rock and debris hundreds of feet into the air.
But it achieves nothing. The wraiths simply utilize that phase-shifting technology you described. They blur into the immaterial plane for the exact microsecond the shockwave hits, allowing the shrapnel and concussive force to pass seamlessly through their ethereal forms before solidifying again.
Amidst this total tactical failure, only the absolute heaviest weapon on the field registers a kill. The Lehman Russ Demolisher, anchoring the center of the line, fires its colossal main cannon.
The sheer, overwhelming kinetic, concussive, and explosive force of that shell connects directly with the Locust Heavy Destroyer.
The result is total physical vaporization. A deafening crack, a blinding flash of light, and the machine is reduced to a scattering of molten slag. First blood to the Imperium.
But that fleeting, desperate triumph introduces the regiment to the true nightmare of this enemy. This is the turning point of the entire engagement, the activation of the arcane reanimation protocols.
The defining trait of the Necron race.
I need to paint the picture of this moment because it breaks the human mind, The men are cheering, the Demolisher crew is frantically reloading, high on the adrenaline of a confirmed kill, and then, within the smoking crater where the heavy destroyer was vaporized, a sickly green light begins to pulse.
It is not a mechanical repair process. It is a fundamental violation of entropy.
The scattered pieces of slag, the shattered armor plating, the ruptured internal circuitry, it all begins to crawl backward, defying gravity.
The metal flows like liquid mercury.
Knitting itself back together, rapidly reconstructing the chassis, the limbs, the heavy cannon, until the Locust heavy destroyer simply stands back up, completely intact. Its power core hums. It is as if the catastrophic damage had simply never occurred in reality. I demand to know the physical mechanism behind this. How do you shoot an enemy that can undie?
You are asking how to kill a concept. The necrodermis is programmed with an engrammatic blueprint of its optimal state. When catastrophic damage occurs, the microscopic scarabs within the metal execute a localized entropic reversal.
Entropic reversal.
Yes. It draws ambient energy to physically reconstruct molecular bonds that have been severed by extreme trauma. It is not merely repairing damage, it is forcefully reverting its physical state to a point in time prior to the damage occurring.
The profound tactical and psychological devastation of this cannot be understated. Let me offer a brutal analogy. Imagine you are aboard a sinking void ship. You are desperately bailing water out of a breached hull. But the water isn't just rushing in from the ocean. The water you are throwing out is mathematically teleporting back in your bucket.
A futile loop.
Every ounce of effort you expend is instantly, perfectly reversed by the environment itself. That is what firing upon these machines feels like.
Your analogy perfectly highlights the collapse of imperial military doctrine. The entire structure of the Astra Militarum relies on a war of attrition. They are trained, fundamentally, to trade resources, ammunition, vehicles, and millions of human lives for confirmed kills.
You sacrifice an entire platoon to destroy an enemy tank, and the Administrata marks it as a strategic net positive because that tank is removed from the board permanently.
But how does a military structure function when the fundamental ledger of cause and effect is erased? When your hard-won victories, paid for in literal rivers of human blood, knit themselves back together and resume firing?
It fundamentally bankrupts the Imperium's math. You aren't fighting an army, you are fighting the concept of inevitability. And inevitability does not pause. The manuscript details a violent, immediate escalation.
The newly resurrected heavy destroyer does not require a recalibration cycle. It instantly raises its heavy cannon and unleashes a retaliatory beam directly into the Lehman Russ Demolisher.
The data states the tank's structural integrity is severely compromised in a single blast. I need you to explain this retaliation. What is the nature of these green beams? Why do they ignore the thickest plasteel armor the Imperium can forge?
Because it is not a kinetic projectile, nor is it a thermal laser. It is a Gauss weapon. Human ballistics rely on punching a hole through armor via brute kinetic force or extreme heat. Gauss weaponry operates on an entirely different physical paradigm.
How so?
It projects a localized, highly focused magnetic field that violently strips the target at the atomic level. It does not punch a hole, it magnetically flays the molecular bonds of the plasteel, the circuitry, and the human crew inside, drawing the constituent atoms back toward the gun.
Unspooling reality atom by atom.
Exactly. Armor thickness is entirely irrelevant to a weapon that functions like that.
And we see the devastating results immediately. On the left flank, it is an absolute slaughter. The Royal Warden coldly directs his warriors, while the standard Locust destroyers unleash a synchronized Gauss crossfire that literally shreds the Chimera transport.
They peel its heavy armor back like foil, vaporizing the crew inside.
Recognizing that his static defensive line is rapidly collapsing under weapons that ignore cover, Commissar Mensteinius executes a desperate, highly aggressive countermaneuver. He does not wait to be systematically dismantled.
He leads his elite shock troops directly out from behind the wreckage of the Chimera, charging screaming into the teeth of the alien advance.
It is a phenomenal localized surge of human defiance. In a brutal point-blank firefight, using melta-charges and sheer kinetic volume, they actually managed to bring down several of the heavily armored immortals and physically tear apart a hovering destroyer.
The center temporarily rallies alongside his charge. The Rattling snipers and the last cannon teams finally crack the code on the Canoptek wraiths, concentrating their fire to overload the dimensional matrices.
Severely damaging one and turning another into grounded scrap metal.
The crew of the Lehman Russ Demolisher, despite their vehicle venting thick black smoke and internal alarms blaring, display exceptional target prioritization. They fire the main cannon again, completely obliterating that same heavy destroyer for a second time.
They then immediately pivot their heavy turret toward the rapidly advancing Scorpic destroyers that are threatening to collapse the right flank.
And the right flank, under the command of Lieutenant Menace, executes what can only be described as a flawless defensive synchronization. She coordinates a combined, deeply layered barrage. The Basilisk artillery, her own shock troops, and a veteran command squad unleash a storm of overlapping fire that utterly decimates the Scorpec Guard.
All that remains standing in that sector is the massive, terrifying Scorpec Lord, standing completely alone amidst the ruined chassis of his vanguard.
To compound this sudden localized success, Manstinius orders a surgical high-risk strike. Squads of Tempestus Scions, the absolute elite drop troops of the Astra Militarum, execute a perfect grab-shoot drop directly behind the enemy lines.
They land amidst the swarms of Canoptech scarabs near the primary mine entrances and systematically wipe them out with high-energy hot-shot volley fire. We must pause our analysis here to deeply acknowledge what the 34th Regiment is achieving in this specific window of time.
It is astounding.
If you evaluate this engagement purely through the lens of human military academies, the Red Ambles are exhibiting immense, unprecedented competence. They are executing highly complex, combined arms tactics in the middle of a sanity-breaking horror show.
Deep strikes, layered artillery, overlapping fields of fire, aggressive countercharges. They are executing textbook doctrine flawlessly.
Every officer is making the correct call. Every soldier is pulling their weight.
They are performing at the absolute zenith of human military capability. And that, Historicus Prefectus, is the profound tragedy of this manuscript.
Yeah.
Their tactical perfection is utterly meaningless. Their flawless execution of centuries-old military doctrine is barely keeping them alive for mere minutes against the raw, supernatural durability of this ancient threat.
It is a painfully cruel irony. They are doing everything right, yet they are still being methodically, mathematically dismantled. It forces us to question the hard limits of human military doctrine. When your entire strategic foundation is built to fight biological enemies, enemies that bleed, enemies that can be suppressed by fear, enemies that die when their internal organs are ruptured.
What good is a perfectly executed flanking maneuver against a cosmic horror that simply undies?
Exactly.
That is the grim calculus the Imperium refuses to formally acknowledge. Human doctrine fundamentally assumes a shared reality of physics and mortality between combatants. The Necrons do not share that reality. They operate on a plane of existence where death is merely a temporary software glitch.
And the manuscript illustrates this horrifying truth in the very next phase of the battle, the mass synchronized activation of the reanimation protocol.
The left flank. It all falls apart with terrifying speed.
Green flashes of light erupt across the entire battlefield en masse. The Locust destroyer that Manstinius' elite troops drag down in bloody melee, its torn chassis knits itself back together, lifting off the ground.
The heavily armored immortals that were blown apart by melta charges, they simply rise from the dust, perfectly whole.
The Canoptech scarabs reassemble their shattered metallic carapaces.
And most devastatingly to the surviving crew of the Demolisher, the Locust Heavy Destroyer resurrects for a third time. It simply refuses to stay dead. Its arcane power core ignites with renewed, spiteful energy, its heavy cannon locking onto the human lines once more.
The horror isn't just that they repair themselves, it's the cold, immediate violence they inflict the exact microsecond they are whole. The Canoptech Wraith that was blasted into grounded scrap by the heavy weapons squad reconstructs its dimensional matrix instantly.
While the human heavy weapons crew is still staring in absolute paralyzed disbelief, the Wraith glides effortlessly forward and massacres the entire squad at point-blank range, its phased talons bypassing their flak armor entirely.
This mass resurrection initiates the total, catastrophic collapse of the command structure on the left flank. Manstanius' advanced aggressive position is completely overrun. The remains of his Chimera transport, which had been providing some marginal physical cover, are reduced to carbonized, unrecognizable scrap by a concentrated Gauss barrage from the resurrected immortals, directed personally by the Overlord.
I want to look at the behavior of the Necron leadership here. I am struck by the surgical, unfeeling nature of their advance.
It's very clinical.
Very. When the Red Ambles fought the traitor Space Marines earlier, it was a furious, blood-crazed brawl. But the Overlord and the Royal Warden synchronized the eradication of the human elite with the cold detachment of a surgeon excising a tumor.
They identify the human command nodes, The Commissar, the heavy weapons, the elite drop troops, and they simply delete them from the battlefield.
And in that deletion, the anchor breaks. Colonel Commissar Valentin Mansteinius, the man holding the regiment together through sheer terror and willpower, falls.
He is grievously wounded, struck down amidst the chaotic melee of silver blades.
The manuscript specifically documents a desperate, incredibly bloody rescue operation. Loyal troops abandon their firing positions, plunging into the meat grinder to pull the critically injured Commissar away from the advancing silver tide, dragging his bleeding form back toward the center lines.
We must analyze the domino effect of a collapsing flank in human military engagements. In human warfare, a flank is not merely a geographical or tactical position, it is a psychological pillar.
Exactly. When Mansteinius falls, the anchor of their morale shatters. He was the one holding the fragile psyche of the regiment, together with the roar of his chainsword and the threat of his bolt pistol.
With him bleeding out on the rock, the existential fear he had forcefully suppressed floods back into the regiment tenfold. But this rescue operation itself, it raises a deeply grim tactical question for you to ponder. Historicus Prefectus.
Please elaborate on the tactical contradiction.
In a battle of pure, desperate survival against an enemy that mathematically outclasses you in every conceivable metric, what is the true cost in human blood to drag one dying leader out of the fire? How many healthy, capable soldiers threw their lives away to pull a bleeding commissar to safety?
Was that act driven by a genuine, profound loyalty to their commander? Or was it a desperate, irrational instinct?
Was it the terrified child clinging to the father figure even as the house burns down around them?
From a purely utilitarian, mathematical standpoint, the standpoint the Necrons operate from, the resources expended to save a dying officer in a collapsing perimeter are entirely wasted. It is a tactical error generated by emotional, biological flaws.
But from a human psychological standpoint, it was an absolute necessity.
Leaving the Commissar to be butchered by silent machines would have likely caused an instantaneous, uncontrolled rout of the entire regiment. They sacrificed healthy bodies to save him in order to save the idea that they were still an army.
That they were still human beings fighting a war and not merely cattle waiting passively for the slaughter.
But the slaughter is coming regardless. While the left flank is being systematically erased, the center becomes a theater of sheer, brutal attrition. The massive Skorpek Lord, the Triad cyborg we discussed earlier, finally breaches the distance and reaches the Lemon Rust Demolisher.
The visual data recorded here is staggering. The Skorpek Lord entirely ignores the desperate defensive fire plinking off its massive frame. It physically climbs onto the hull of the Lemon Rust, anchors its bladed limbs into the tracks, and begins carving directly into the thickest plasteel armor with its hyperphase harvester. A massive energy cleaver.
You mentioned phase shifting earlier with the Wraiths. How does a hyperphase harvester cut through a battle tank?
Oh wait, I asked you that. You're the expert.
Yeah, right. It utilizes a similar dimensional principle applied to a localized cutting edge. The blade vibrates across dimensional frequencies, allowing it to bypass the solid molecular structure of the armor plating.
It is not cutting the plasteel. It is phasing through it and severing the molecular bonds from within.
It is literally gutting the pride of the Imperial armored core with effortless precision.
But the Demolisher is not dead yet. The human crew inside, inevitably deafened by the alarms, bleeding from the concussive impacts, knowing they are mere seconds from being sliced into ribbons of flesh and metal, refuse to eject. They refuse to abandon their post.
In a final, deafening roar of absolute human defiance, they manually angle the main cannon point blank at the Colossus tearing through their roof, and they fire.
The overpressure, the kinetic payload, the explosive fury detonating at zero range, it completely obliterates the Necron Lord. It violently disintegrates the alien commander in a localized flash of absolute destruction.
It is a phenomenal display of stubborn resilience. With Mansteinius incapacitated and bleeding out, operational command immediately falls to Lieutenant Menace on the right flank. She desperately attempts to stabilize the remaining shattered forces.
Her troops concentrate every ounce of their remaining firepower and finally, permanently destroy the relentless Locust Heavy Destroyer. Its necrodermis core suffers catastrophic failure, and its shattered remains stay grounded.
But everywhere else, the mathematical noose is tightening. The Tempesta Scions, who executed that flawless, textbook deep strike in the rear, are now completely trapped in a deadlocked, bloody melee with the advancing Necron warriors, their hotshot lasguns useless in close quarters.
The stealthy rattling snipers, whose position was eventually compromised, are entirely massacred by the gliding, phase-shifting wraiths.
And through it all, that profoundly battered Leman Russ demolisher incredibly survives. Despite its heavy armor being deeply cleaved open, despite taking concentrated Gauss fire from the remaining skeletal infantry, the engine groans, the tracks violently grind against the bedrock, and the machine refuses to die.
Listening to the screams of the dying elite troops on the Vox network, watching the left flank dissolve into green fire, and knowing her commissar's life is rapidly fading, Lieutenant Menace is forced into the only logical choice left to a human commander. She orders a full, immediate, and unconditional retreat from the city of Picars.
We must deeply emphasize the grave reality of ordering an Astra Militarum retreat. To order a retreat in the Imperial Guard is to invite intense investigation, public disgrace, and almost certain execution by the Commissariat upon return to base.
But Menace is calculating the total, imminent annihilation of her remaining forces. She is making an agonizing command decision. She is ordering her surviving men to abandon the bodies of their fallen comrades.
She is abandoning the primary tactical objective. She is leaving behind the very city they just purged of its civilian population at the cost of their own souls. It is a victory of mere biological survival, but it is a total, undeniable, and humiliating strategic defeat.
It is heartbreaking. And as they pull back, as the broken remnants of the regiment scramble for the transports, let's look at the Leman Russ demolisher one last time. I want to offer this philosophical concept to you, Historicus Perfectus. The Leman Russ tank, as documented in this manuscript, operates as the ultimate, perfect symbol of human stubbornness.
It is structurally broken, it is venting internal fires.
It is literally bleeding thick black oil onto the alien rock. Yet it absolutely refuses to yield to the elegant, mathematically perfect alien weaponry. It reverses slowly, firing its secondary heavy bolters in a desperate arc, serving as the literal and metaphorical shield for the terrified retreating infantry.
It is the Imperium in miniature. Ugly, brutally damaged, bleeding from 1,000 wounds, but furiously refusing to just roll over and die.
A profoundly apt metaphor. The stubborn mass of the heavy armor buys the remnants of the 34th Regiment the crucial seconds they need to break visual contact and retreat into the wastes. And this brings us to the most chilling, perspective-altering conclusion of the data extract.
As the humans frantically retreat, scrambling back into the ash-choked wastes of the Separata sector, the Necrons do not pursue.
That is the detail that truly terrifies. They just stop. The Silver March halts. They stand perfectly still in the poisonous emerald fog, their cold, glowing green optical slits, simply watching the humans flee.
They do not hunt them down. They simply turn and reclaim the silent, blood-soaked ruins of Picars.
Because the total destruction of the human regiment was never their primary military objective. The humans were merely an organic variable in the way. It was an act of pest control.
The final pages of the manuscript reveal the horrifying foundational truth of the planetary terrain itself. The imperial mining complexes, the deep-core Prometheum refineries, the massive subterranean shafts dug by generations of human colonists, they were built directly, ignorantly, atop dormant subterranean tombs of unfathomable scale.
The structural data describes the ground itself beginning to violently fracture. Giant, mathematically perfect pyramids of living, green-lit metal begin to tear upward through the earth, rising endlessly from the depths of the mines.
The rock crust of the planet is physically pushed aside as ancient, impossible architecture breaches the surface, casting massive shadows over the slaughtered city.
Planet Baldar is not merely a battleground. It never was. It is physically awakening as a tomb world. The sheer existential dread of this encounter cannot be overstated. Historicus Perfectus.
The 34th Regiment fought with supreme human courage and flawless tactical brilliance, only to realize, far too late, that they were fighting the automated immune system of a slumbering god. It is a stark, brutal reminder of humanity's precarious position in a hostile, indifferent galaxy.
We arrogantly build our empires on the dust of beings that conquered the stars before human ancestors even crawled from the oceans.
And that profound vulnerability leaves us with a final, chilling question for you to mull over in the quiet dark of the archives. Historicus Perfectus.
You know the history of the Separata sector. You know it was isolated for 300 years. You know it is filled with dozens of heavily populated, highly industrialized planets, exactly like Baldar.
So if this single, seemingly mundane mining world successfully hid an entire slumbering armada of immortal machines beneath its crust, how many other populated worlds in the isolated Separata sector are currently building their cities, their schools, and their factories upon the sleeping graveyards of gods?
We leave you with the absolute silence of that question, until the archives open again. Remember, the chaos of human survival is comforting, but it is the unnatural rhythmic silence that you must truly fear.